Armand here with a special report on the Capricorn Winter Solstice 2022. I'm going to go right ahead and call it the Winter Solstice, even though I know that if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's the Summer Solstice. But I'm going to continue to call it the Winter Solstice because 85% of the world's population lives in the Northern Hemisphere. And most of the folks who live in the Southern Hemisphere actually sort of come from Northern, usually European, cultural origins. And I know that might be a little difficult and so on, but I think astrologically, we should be thinking about this as the winter solstice. I hope I don't get canceled by Southern Hemisphere people. That would be, well, it'd only be 15% of the population, right? So let's talk about the solstice. But before we do, a couple of little points to bring up and for you to hold on to as we go forward. First of all, this is, unlike the weekly forecast or the monthly forecast, the upcoming forecast for the year and so on. This is a forecast that really has to do mostly with the collective. For most folks, this doesn't have much to do with their personal charts. Okay, now that we've lost 75% of the viewers, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the way that we have to approach this forecast. You know, we can't really say what's going to happen, right? This isn't about what's going to happen. The planets set the table for us. We decide what we're going to do, or they bring the food into the pantry and we decide what we're going to cook, or something like that. You get the idea. So we can't say with any definitive, this is what's going to happen kind of approach to things. We have to say, this is the vibe that is getting set up. This is the way the stage has been set. Let's see what happens. To the extent that we have, you know, intelligence, to the extent that we have compassion, to the extent that we have love, to the extent that we have awareness, we can create our own outcomes. That having been said, when we're talking about the collective, we don't usually get quite as much leeway as we do as individuals because the collective is the collective. And you know how it is when you get people together in groups and you get these sort of the larger groups and so on, you've got a danger of some sort of, you know, psychological contagion going on at worst. But more or less, the group tends to work along the lines of the least common denominator. It's the baseline level of consciousness, and maybe even a little bit below the baseline for the culture, because the group is a great way for you to get out some of those, you know, more negative, more limiting kinds of emotions and feelings about things. You know, in your own life, you might say, well, you know, but when it comes to the group, it's like, yeah, you know, I'm angry. Let's go do this. That type of thing happen. And it's usually, to tell you the truth, it's usually a little bit easier to predict for the collective than it is for individuals. Because there's not as much choice when you've got to steer the big ship of an entire society along. So yeah, we can't really say what's going to happen. And we can certainly hope that the level of consciousness and awareness and compassion and so on is higher than we hope, higher than we think it is. And that might bring about a better outcome for various things. So we're not sure what's going to happen. But what we can say is, what is the particular flavor of this solstice? Let's think about what the solstice is. The solstice is the Capricorn solstice, the winter solstice, is the point where the sun has traveled as far south as he's ever going to go. And so we have the darkest day of the year. The sun rises far to the south of east, and it sets far to the south of west. And during the day, it cuts just a small little arc in the sky. It doesn't never really get very high in the sky. So it's the darkest day of the year in terms of the solar light. That might seem rather discouraging, except for the fact that there's nowhere to go except to rise and go more northward in the sky. And so the darkest day of the year is the turning point, which becomes the light. So that's why we have all of the celebrations of light right around the winter solstice. So, Christmas with all the Christmas lights, and Christmas itself, the holiday was grafted onto the celebration of Mithra, which was a sun god. And all the lights and so on come from many different traditions. The idea of like there being lights coming back. We also have Hanukkah, Kwanzaa. You celebrate with light. And it's kind of like, on the one hand, it's like, well, if the sun isn't giving us light, we'll make our own. And the celebration of light is partially saying, okay, well, now the sun is going to start coming back up in the sky. And, at least back in the day, let's encourage the sun to come back up in the sky. Now, sometimes we have, a couple of years ago, we had a full moon on the solstice. And then you get the contrast of the darkest solar day with the bright light of the moon at night. And if you're in the northern hemisphere, the full moon nearest the solstice will be the brightest one, because that's when the moon is highest in the sky. And so you get a little bit more of an effect from the moon at the time, and you get the sort of compensation. If it's going to be a dark day, it's going to be a bright night. Okay, so we don't have that this year. We don't have that this year. What we have this year is the new moon coming only 2 days after the solstice. So we have a dark day and we have a very dark night. There's not much light around, except, what as I said, except, to the extent that we make our own. And we make our own quite a bit now, right? Now, the big news about this solstice is that the sun, as he goes into Capricorn, is going to be square to Jupiter, who has just entered Aries, entered just a day before Aries. So Jupiter is at 0 degrees of Aries as the sun is at 0 degrees of Capricorn. 0 degrees of cardinal signs are known as the world axis in astrology, right? This is the axis where things happen on the world stage. So we always look to the solstice and we look to the equinoxes as being times that will give us a little bit of a prediction for the vibe in social, political stuff for the next 3 to 6 months. And it's quite significant that both Jupiter and the sun are sitting on the world axis at the solstice. How shall we interpret this? Well, let's see how the planets are feeling about things. First of all, a square aspect is a tense aspect, which is usually considered to be very challenging. But the sun and Jupiter get along really well together. They are both fiery planets. They share deacons of signs, and so there's a lot of stuff that works well between these two. So then, they're kind of in good stead with each other. Jupiter is actually in the sun's favorite sign. The sun loves Aries. Why? Because from this darkest day, as he starts to grow, when he gets into Aries, he is above the horizon more than half the day. So this is the sign that he's like, well, I'm finally here. I'm finally up in the sky more than I'm below. So that's his favorite sign. That's a very positive kind of thing. So the sun and Jupiter get along well. Jupiter's in the sun's favorite sign. On the other hand, the sun is in Jupiter's least favorite sign of Capricorn, because Capricorn is constricting, it's serious, it's methodical, and Jupiter's like just expansive and, not necessarily fun, but is expansive and optimistic and has, faith for things and so on. And you don't get a lot of that in Capricorn. So that's a little bit more of a challenge. So when we see, though, on the positive side, when we see Jupiter in the sun's favorite sign and the sun growing in light, and in a couple of days, the moon will be growing in light too, just to give us an extra little signal. We could think of this whole solstice thing as the light at the end of the tunnel. We have the darkest day, but, we know that there's light coming. So it could be the light at the end of the tunnel. I cannot help but think, however, you'll either get this or you don't. I can think about the Roadrunner cartoons where the coyote sort of sees the light at the end of the tunnel, and it turns out to be like a freight train or a truck or something like that coming for him. You know, it could go that way too, I suppose. In fact, there are some indications of this being a very challenging solstice. That's why I've talked my way all the way out here before even really getting into it, because, you know, yeah, it's only for those who are really going to listen to the whole story and are stout of heart to think about this solstice and what it could imply. A couple of things worth thinking about. Jupiter is in Aries, and that is the sign that is associated with competition, with assertiveness. It is associated with war. Right? It's Mars' home sign, and Jupiter in Aries. Jupiter in Aries, there's a video on Jupiter in Aries on the channel if you go look for it. But Jupiter in Aries is the sort of, you bring the enthusiasm to the Aries stuff. You take Jupiter's optimism and faith, but you put it in the coloration of Aries. All right. So, well, what is this going to do for us? Well, Jupiter in Aries is sort of the martial music. It's that kind of, the inspiring, the college fight song. It is really like the marching songs that get people so, enthused and ready to go to war. That's a little potentially troubling. Don't worry, Jupiter goes through Aries every 12 years, so it's not like that in and of itself means much. But, we do want to kind of keep that aspect of things together. Another thing to look at is the fact that Mars, the ruler of Aries, is retrograde until January 12th. Now, Mars is at the solstice retrograde, which means that he's powerful, but not expressing himself directly. And Mars is also out of bounds. Right? Mars is out of bounds at the solstice, which means he's beyond the level of the declination of where the sun ever goes. He's farther out than the sun ever goes. And it's not just Mars that's farther out. Venus is farther out. Mercury, planet of communication, is farther out, and in fact, about to go retrograde. And at the solstice, the moon will be out of bounds. Okay, so we have, this is, and the moon will be out of bounds in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's sign. So we have this very, I think in my, I know in my weekly forecast, I say very frenzied energy at the solstice. There's a lot of frenzied energy happening right now. This solstice is also, I'll hold on to that for a bit. Another thing that we have to look at is that not only are Jupiter and the sun on the world axis at 0 degrees cardinal, but Uranus, the planet of revolution out there at 15 degrees Taurus, Uranus is on the world axis because it's 15 degrees of cardinal sign, of third time's a charm. 15 degrees of fixed signs is the world axis. Again, it could be a lot of different things, but there is some potential for trouble here. Now, one thing that we do when we're looking at the solstice is to see where is the sun, and in this case, Jupiter comes right along with him. Where is the sun going to be extremely powerful? In other words, where is the sun rising? Where is the sun setting? Where is it culminating overhead? As high overhead as he ever gets, and where is he? We call him astrology the IC. Where is he below, directly below the Earth? In addition to being northocentric, I'm also, of course, being geocentric, but that's fine because that's the way we see things, right? We see things from the geocentric perspective. So, and that's what astrology has to do with it. It has to do with the way we see things, the way we perceive things. So we're not into the astronomy at this level anyway. So where is the sun angular, as we say? Where is he rising or setting or culminating or below? The first place I want to note is that both the sun and Jupiter have lines that go directly, well, they go slightly to the east of Kiev, we used to call it, Kiev in the Ukraine. okay, right there. And, you know, you take everything I've said so far and you see that where is this most likely to have a powerful manifestation? Right through the Ukraine, a country that is at war, is the first major, well, any war is a major war. It's the first acknowledged as major war that we've had in decades, and it's going straight down through Kiev. It continues, that line continues down. Now, follow this. It continues down through Ankara in Turkey. It goes just to the east again of Ankara in Turkey. And then it goes down, it actually follows the Nile straight down. And so it would go through Cairo, a place that you might want to keep an eye on. Other places where we have the sun angular, it goes through Indonesia. It kind of cuts through the southern part of the Philippines. It goes up just to the east of Tokyo. Okay, this is the rising line, goes just to the east of Tokyo. The line that is setting, believe it or not, goes just to the west of Washington, D.C. It goes up, that follows up into the neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, and then on into Sault Ste. Marie, and then up into Canada. I don't think major Canadian cities are really hit by this line, but Washington, D.C. is hit by this line. And it's worthwhile to note that this solstice occurs 7 days before the last hit of the U.S. Pluto return. Okay, so we have, you know, the U.S. is, you know, the Pluto comes back to the same spot in the zodiac. I'm using tropical zodiac here. Every 248 years, he's been going back and forth over this point, but his last exact hit is on December 28th. And that's right around the solstice. So we're all getting this sort of compacted kind of energy. That line continues down and it goes it goes a little to the west of Brasilia in Brazil. Now, one thing that you might pick up from all of this, right? We have the war situation in Eastern Europe already hot. We have lines going through Turkey, Egypt. We have a line going through Brazil. We have a lot of the strong men, and they're all pretty much men, a lot of strong men countries that have really in the last decade or so tilted towards the right and towards authoritarianism, right? Turkey, Brazil's got a whole dramatic story going on, but for sure. Egypt, the Philippines, we have a lot of right-wing stuff that is really grown. It's just authoritarian. It doesn't really matter much if it's right or left. We have a lot of authoritarianism in these countries. Now, most of this stuff got entrenched or got in place with Uranus in Aries from 2011 to 2019. That's what kind of started things up in these areas. Jupiter's going to come in, and what's going to happen? Well, you know, Jupiter's not on the left or on the right. The planets aren't, you know, they're not on one side or the other. It's not like, you know, Saturn's a Republican or anything. At times they may resonate more with one or the other of a party or something like that, but that's not really the way they work. They usually would stir up, even within a party, they would stir up different types of energies that resonate. So, Jupiter will, on the one hand, encourage the people that have been living under authoritarian rule, increasingly authoritarian rule, to, I don't want to say revolt, but to advocate for their freedom. On the other hand, Jupiter will also, no doubt, help to inspire the leaders of those authoritarian countries to clamp down, push through a little harder. You know, Jupiter just encourages, in this case, he's encouraging the Aries energy. So you're going to get a little bit of both. I can't say what would happen with the United States. It looks like it is, the contentious political atmosphere continues. The Pluto of the United States in the most used chart, the Sibley chart, is in the second house. And that is the house of finances and well, enough said. I would say that it's really more of a world problem than it is in the US, but the US ties into the world pretty directly. The US economy and the world economy are very closely linked. Japan is a bit of a problem because having that sun line go through Japan sort of, or she really goes off the coast of Japan but just goes on to the land just a little to the east of Tokyo. But we don't have to be that precise about things because Japan has been under threat from North Korea. We're all kind of under threat from North Korea. If they can get to us, we're all kind of under threat from North Korea. And there's a Mars line. Remember, Mars rules Aries. Mars is retrograde and out of bounds. And there is a Mars line that goes very close to Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. On a more optimistic note, there's also a Mars line that goes through Buenos Aires, and they won the World Cup. So maybe it really is all about sports. Maybe it's all about sports. Who knows? Anyways, so we have this kind of tension that speaks to difficulties in these areas and changes in these areas and potential difficulties for sure. Now, Olga Morales, an Australian astrologer, I did a Cosmic Intelligence Agency webinar with she and a few other astrologers. I think it's probably still available on Facebook or YouTube if you look up the Cosmic Intelligence Agency page. They had some great stuff, really, really, really exciting stuff. She pointed out, she did a little research and discovered that this 0 degrees Capricorn, 0 degrees Aries square between Jupiter and the sun occurs every 83 years, like clockwork. Right? At the winter solstice, every 83 years, the sun is square to Jupiter in Aries, 0 degrees, 0 degrees. Fascinating. When was the last time that it happened? 1939. Again, I'm not saying that we're going to have the Third World War. I am saying that we have ourselves quite a predicament here. It's not for nothing that we look back to 1939, which was, it's kind of the start of the Second World War. If you were a non-king at the time, you would be justified in saying the war had been going on for a few years already. But it was 1939 that Hitler's armies invaded Poland, and that really started the war in Europe, and that was a possible start point for it. In the United States, you might think 1941, but 1939 is kind of accepted as being a start point for it. It doesn't mean that we are in the same boat. We might be in the same boat. We certainly have enough tensions going on with North Korea, China, and Taiwan, and also with Ukraine. Now, a good thing to do, if you want to understand how an astrological energy is going to play out, a really good strategy is to look and see what happens right around the event. So what's happening right around the solstice? Well, I'm making this video the day before the solstice, so you're on your own. Except I'm going to tell you a couple of things because Jupiter's already gone into Aries, and we have a few little things to think about already. One thing, with Jupiter at 29 degrees and change of Pisces, we had the accord, the United Nations Accord to try to save species. And we also had the United States Congress, the January 6th committee, recommending that former President Trump and others be indicted, both of which are very big, bold statements. And as we would expect for something at the very, very end of Pisces, not necessarily particularly likely to lead to any kind of action. For example, sadly, no such climate accord or species saving accord has ever been, no goal has ever been met there's no binding agreement for any of the countries or anything like that. It's just sort of like a good faith, rah, rah, rah type of thing. And as for the January 6th committee, I mean, the Department of Justice could have investigated and brought charges anytime in the last 2 years. Maybe they'll appreciate having some more evidence and things like that. Maybe they will feel some pressure, but it would be a very, very big step. So it could very well be this sort of shouting, and again, Jupiter, it's this sort of here we go, but last degree of Pisces, maybe we're not going to go anywhere. On the other hand, here we have Jupiter getting into Aries, warlike Aries, and there goes Vladimir Putin. Yeah, let's call him that. Putin. He goes to Belarus, and pretty certainly asking for the Belarusians to help with the war in Ukraine. That could certainly escalate the situation in many different ways. Right around the same time, the U.S. sending Patriot missile systems to Ukraine, which again is sort of an escalation kind of scenario. So it's getting a little bit more tense in that area. Plus, North Korea has been announcing new nuclear strategies, and they've been testing right along. But they made an announcement just the other day, and the U.S. has been flying warplanes next to in the area, let's just say, in a kind of show of you kind of don't want to mess with us, which again represents a pretty significant escalation. It doesn't mean, remember, all the planets are out of bounds and everything like that. Everybody's frenzied. It doesn't mean that it's going to pop. It doesn't mean that anything's going to happen, but it would certainly be of some concern. Now, the last thing to consider is, when are things going to happen? Well, there's a pretty good question for you. The first point that I would want to make about it is that with Mars retrograde, we probably would not see the most overt expression of the solstice energy until he goes direct on January 12th. That doesn't mean a lot. That doesn't really mean a lot, because we could still have some pretty dramatic effects, but it would probably be sometime after January 12th. What would I think of as being a most likely kind of popping point? Well, let's think about that. Well, one possibility would be, although it is before Mars goes direct, it would be the January 6th full moon. That's a possibility. I would certainly keep an eye on it. The new moon on January 21st is accompanied by a Uranus station on the 22nd. And I would look at that, as Uranus stations direct, I would look at that as being a time when things might really start showing up. That's a pretty significant new moon. We'll talk about that more as we go along. But I would think that so I don't think we have a long time to wait to see what's going to happen in terms of how the solstice energy is manifesting. But those are the times that I think are most likely. I mean, every full moon from now through March is a popping time, and we have a lot of hot aspects and stuff like that. But in the short run, I would say look at January 6th, and I would say look at January 21st and 22nd, and pay a little extra attention to what happens right on the day of the solstice, right on, this is going to be Wednesday, December 21st. And that is, just in case, if you've gotten all the way out here, it is Wednesday, January 21st at 4:48 p.m. Eastern Time, and that would be 9:48 p.m. Greenwich, although we should really put that as 21:48 Greenwich. And from there, with those 2 points, you can figure it out. Okay. Don't forget to come back subscribe for the weekly forecast. You'll get the weekly forecast on that'll be out on Saturday, December 24th. And then next week, we'll do the year ahead 2023, and that will be some of this kind of what's going on in the world stuff, but also a little bit more in terms of how we might see this play out in our personal lives. I will see you then.